This is Take a Cue, episode 18, now available in video on Spotify and on YouTube.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Take a Cue. I'm Erik, 8th grade band and jazz band director.
And I'm Jen Weiss, 4th and 5th grade instrumental music teacher.
We're two veteran educators with over 35 years of experience teaching music in New Jersey public schools between the two of us, and we're excited to bring teaching, experiences, and insights to you.
So excited. Whether you're just starting out in your teaching career, you've been teaching longer than we have, this show will help you grow with new ideas and perspectives about music, education, and teaching.
We hope you'll be just as inspired as we are every time you listen. Before we begin, if you enjoy our podcast, please help us out by doing a few super easy things.
First, subscribe on your favorite podcast app.
Then make sure you rate the podcast 5 stars and leave a review.
It helps people find our show who haven't yet, and we really appreciate it.
If you find that you get a lot out of our episodes, we'd be grateful if you considered becoming a monthly supporter to help us grow the podcast.
You can sign up to make a secure monthly donation using the link in our show notes or on our Anchor site, anchor.fm/takeaq. That's all one word.
Also, if you have questions or comments about anything you hear on the episode, come and interact with us on social media or Take a Cue Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Erik. Oh, my goodness. Tonight is going to be a good one. This is a good one.
It's a great episode tonight. We get to talk with a former band director and administrator here in New Jersey, John Leister, and he kind of pulls back the curtain on interviews and demo lessons and all of this great stuff. For anybody that's out there kind of getting into the profession or maybe looking to change positions, this episode is going to be so invaluable.
Mm-hmm. I really wish I had all this information when I was first starting out or transitioning between positions. This is really great info. It's a really great conversation for those of you out there job hunting or those of you considering job hunting.
Sure. And in the episode, you're going to hear from John, but you're also going to hear from Jen and from me about our experiences, both as interviewees and as interviewers. Mm-hmm. And actually, the episode got so long when we were recording it that we actually decided to split this up into a twofer. So you get to enjoy not just one episode about how to ace your interview and get the job, but also another bonus episode on this one. It's going to be a lot of late nights editing, I think, but it's worth it.
So worth it. And you all deserve it out there. You deserve to find the position that really fits you and, find the administrative team that really works for you. So we hope this helps you out.
We're lucky enough that we have found that without a podcast to help us along the way.
I don't know how we did it, but we're
really lucky. I feel so lucky to be able to teach with Jen and with all of our colleagues and our administrators at my school and our district. So hopefully this will help you find your place.
Yep.
All right. Should we throw it on over to our chat with John?
Let's do it. Let's get to meet John.
John, thank you so much for taking the time tonight to talk with us about interviews and getting the job and all this great stuff. We're really excited to chat this evening and sort of pick your brain and talk about some of the experiences we've had. But we're really excited to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. Really looking forward to it. Awesome. And is everything going to be in English?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
excellent.
Speak very little French. So.
Very good. Very good.
Same. So John, it sounds like, you've been on both sides of the table, but would you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your experience and how you got here on the Take a Cue podcast tonight?
Yes. Well, it's been like all of us, we all have sort of winding journeys as musicians. But I went to school at the University of Illinois and did then a master's at Juilliard. Both degrees were in performance, and my goal was to become a full-time performing percussionist, which I did for about 5 years. Did some tours, 3 Broadway tours, and was freelancing, played at the paper mill for 2 years, and was, of course, teaching privately. And I was coaching 5 marching drum lines at various high schools here in New Jersey. So that was going well. Although when I got married, because of my freelance schedule and my wife's schedule, she's a registered nurse and she was working a day shift. We basically saw each other Saturday mornings and Monday nights. That was it. Either she was at work or I was at work. So we started to kind of think about having a family and long-term plans and so on. And oddly enough, I got a phone call on August 17th from the New Providence School District. And they were looking for a high school band director because their terrific band director, Pete Corey, had left to take another position. And so they were kind of high and dry. So they said through a mutual friend, let's interview John. So I went in and went through the interview. And the longer I sat in that chair, the more excited I got. It just sounded like such a fantastic opportunity. So I did. I was offered that position through the alternate route program, the alternate route to certification, because I was not a certified teacher at the time. And started teaching right away with marching band. My first position was 3rd grade strings, beginning strings, 3rd grade recorder, 4th and 5th grade beginner band at one school, middle school band at one school, all the high school bands. So marching, concert, jazz band, the musical, the summer program. And so it was a really great learning opportunity for me. So I was there for a total of 8 years in New Providence. As the program grew, it eventually became just middle school and high school. And then I took over as department chair and was doing high school bands and department chair. By that point, we had 3 young children. And again, it was sort of a reassessing, scratching our heads a little bit going, is this the right setup or not? And I was really missing seeing my kids at a young age. And oddly enough, I got a phone call from the Madison Public Schools saying they needed to borrow some music stand lights for their high school show. P.S. Did I know anyone who was looking for a middle school band job? So I said, could you tell me a little bit about it? They did. Obviously, I interviewed and that worked out. And so I went over, left New Providence. Very tough district to leave because it's so wonderful, great people. And went over to the Madison Public Schools, ended up staying there for 11 years, again, as a teacher for most of that time. And then I shifted into administration. My last year there, I was half K to 12 music and art supervisor and half middle school vice principal. And then from there, I jumped into a principalship in Hanover Township. And finally, I was an elementary principal in Livingston for 8 years. And I, quote unquote, retired from admin. And I really wanted to go back to playing and teaching again while I still could. While I was still young enough and still able to perform. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 6 years. I'm at a private school. So I'm obviously retired from public school and I'm teaching at Montclair Kimberly Academy. That was all part-time. I was, again, playing, teaching at Elefanti Music, touring a little bit with the Paragon Ragtime Orchestra. And about a year ago, they asked me to come on full-time as the high school band director. And so I am there full-time again, sort of full circle back. I was hoping with the full circle, maybe my hair would grow back, but that hasn't happened.
Join the club, John.
You look good, Erik. You look very good. Anyway, that's the long story, but I have had kind of this parallel career as an educator and a performer. So I continued to play all through, even the years as a principal. My last year as a principal, I got a really cool call to play for a benefit that Sting was putting together, and played behind some incredible musicians and with some incredible musicians. And again, that helped me to make the decision like, wait, while I can still play, I still physically able, let me sneak out of this administrative world and go back to music.
Well, you've had quite the varied career of, in the classroom, out of the classroom, out of schools, in schools. I mean, that's such a valuable experience, list of experiences for you to draw from. It sounds incredibly rich. And just so our listeners know, believe it or not, I didn't meet John in Livingston. I actually met John back at Madison for the first time. And then our paths crossed again in Livingston, which is kind of cool. So a little fun connection there for our listeners that may not know that.
And hopefully we'll connect again as performers together.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We've got so much to talk about with our topic this evening on interviewing and getting the job and all this. And we've got so much to do. I think the best way to kind of go through it is to do it chronologically. We'll start with getting the interview, and John's thoughts on that and our experiences with that. And then kind of go into the interview meetings where you talk with administrators. And then for a lot of job interviews, a lot of people obviously listening probably know this, but you may be asked to do a demo lesson and even a teacher performance. I know when I was at Madison, I got to do that for you, John. And then we can kind of go after that, after the interview process, what to do. Then what happens when you're offered the job? And then we'll take it where it goes after that. How does that sound tonight?
Great. Let me go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, I know. It's that first step, that first launch, that's really mystifying for a lot of people. I think you're right. I think that's a good place to start. Like what should my resume look like? And is that the most important thing, or is it the people you meet before you hand that out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Yeah. I that's a really good point, Jen. Networking is really probably number one before anything. And who you meet in college and how you treat people and the friends you have and the professors that support you and so on. I really think that's key in our world of music. As a principal, I would see many resumes, of course, especially for classroom teachers, sometimes in the thousands. And through AppleTrack, we would just sort of swipe through. So I would take maybe look at 80 in a sitting. And if I didn't see a gold star that excited me and interested me, I would swipe.
I want to just pause here for a second, because the people that listen may not exactly know what AppleTrack is, or they may have a different kind of online system for them. But I'm curious, from your end, what do you see when somebody applies to a job? Like, what's the first thing that you see? Do you look through the entire cover letter and resume for those 80 individuals, or like, what do you see, and then what like stands out to you immediately?
Yeah, just because of time, I didn't even look at the cover letter. If I looked at that, it would be secondary. Mm-hmm. So I would look at the top third of the resume, and from that top third, I needed to see something that piqued my interest. Like, oh, okay, well, we're looking for a general music classroom teacher. Oh, here's someone who taught classroom music, same grades in a neighboring district. Okay. Click. I'm going to print that one out, and then that's going to go into a pile of printed resumes. So that's how I did my screening. Top third or top half. I wouldn't even scroll down, and then if there was nothing there, okay, I'm going to scroll over. I have another 79 to look at. Obviously, in the music world, there are less resumes to look at. Nevertheless, I would probably look at the top half anyway of the resume before scrolling down further. If we only had a dozen resumes, then we'd certainly print all of them out. And in terms of that gold star, I've talked to a lot of college students or graduating college students and coached them on their resumes. And I would always say, I would ask them, okay, well, what leadership positions did you have? Okay, great. Did you win any awards? Yeah, well, I won a certain award in Scouts, or a certain award in my fraternity. Or I said, okay, well, those are gold stars. Those need to be up near the top. And I noticed, there's no GPA on here. Boy, if you've got a GPA in the, over 3.2 or higher, let's put that down, because that shows a lot of hard work, a lot of accomplishments, a lot of professors think highly of you. And we were lucky enough in Livingston and in Hanover Township that we could, we got a lot of nice resumes and some really wonderful, hardworking, creative musicians. So I think that sometimes with the resumes, people have, or most often they have the gold stars. They have the gold stars, but they may not have put them high enough on their resume yet. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something really to think about. And of course, you can go online and look at sample resumes. But if you have a teacher in your university setting, or a friend who maybe has been out for a couple of years, definitely run your resume by them and say, what do you think? Do you see enough things in the top third or not? For example, I coach some college students. Let's not put our high school material right at the top. Let's flip that, put our most recent, wonderful things that we've done. And so we see the best right at the top. And then we might read down a little bit.
Hey, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Jen, I don't know what your experience was, but I remember, getting some coaching in college, 22, 23 years ago. And it was often said, like, put your education first. And, instead of the experiences. Now, Jen, did you have that as well, or did they tell you something different?
So I did. They said, put your education first. Don't mention anything at high school unless you were your valedictorian or something. There's not much to mention except for where you went to high school and when, and then move right on to college and your accomplishments there. And again, like you said, John, if your GPA was something to be proud of, put that right there. And any awards you received in college for academics. I saved like my musician awards. Like we'd want to. The wind ensemble had won like a downbeat award, when we were there for a recording we did. And I saved those things for the second half of my resume, like the musical stuff, because I had just assumed that the first person that was going to look at my resume in a lot of districts wasn't a musician. So that might not mean a whole lot, but they might know that I was, working on my master's, and I ended up as a member of Pi Lambda Theta. Like that might like ring a bell for somebody that the professor, put my name out there to be a part of that. So, I put academic awards at the top of my resume, but saved the musicianship ones for later on.
Sure.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like, I don't know. It sounds to me like, John, you're kind of saying that it may be more beneficial to put some of those experiences first, and maybe leave some of the academic college and high school stuff like later in the resume. Am I hearing you correctly in that?
Yes and no. I agree with both of you and whoever spoke with you, and probably the same advice I got. The first thing the principal has to see is you're going to graduate in May of 2023 or whenever it is, and B, what's your status on certification?
Right.
So that's number one. Then, okay, graduating, certified, or on your way, boom. Then we can go down to the next element. But that's first, because I've actually made the mistake of almost hiring someone who wasn't a U.S. citizen. So there, I've almost hired someone who wasn't certified. I mean, so obviously we have to go through certain steps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
But I do agree with your question, Erik, about there's got to be something that interests the principal or supervisor to say, oh, I'd like to ask this person more about that. They played. They did a tour to Europe. Oh, I'd like to ask him about that. Mm-hmm. Or they performed behind Josh Groban for something or other at Carnegie Hall. Oh, I'd like to learn more about that. Mm-hmm. Or I can remember there was a person who was an outstanding athlete at Penn State. They were a classroom teacher, but I thought, oh, wow, I'd like to hear about, that, to be a D1 athlete. Wow, this is somebody who knows how to schedule their time and work hard.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm wondering, as somebody who's looking at a second or third job in teaching, like say you taught classroom music for 2 years and then you taught band, but you really want to get back to teaching classroom music. Which experience goes first? The most recent or the one that's related to the position you're applying for? Because I was always told, okay, your most recent thing goes up top, and then after that, but I would also want to highlight that I have experience in the thing that I'm applying for. You know what I mean? So is it just standard? Okay, you put your most recent thing, first when it comes to public school teaching experience, because I think most of our listeners are, public school teachers, or, is it, should I just put the thing that I know they're looking for right at the top?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to decide kind of, okay, chronologically, am I going to go most recent to, least recent? Or the other philosophy is basically, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but when you're in an interview or whether you're posting or providing a resume, you want to convince the administrator that you can do the job. So if you've already been a general music teacher and that's what this position is, okay, I'm getting convinced already in line 5 that this is somebody who could be, really successful for us. I also see a lot of resumes where someone will say, okay, I was a grade, K-5 general music teacher, and then 8 bullet points. And then I was a 4th and 5th grade band director, 10 bullet points. No one reads 8 or 10 bullet points anymore. We just don't. We don't read. So I always counsel keep it to 3 or 4. That's it. And the 3 or 4 biggies, not, I taught a full schedule 5 days a week. Okay, we all do that, but to put more of those 3 or 4 really amazing things.
All right. So ideal length, John, ideal length of the resume.
I always counsel people 1, maximum 2. And if it's, if you go into page 2, I always recommend to list references. Now, again, depending on the AppleTrack program or whatever the software program that the district is using or the state is using, they may have references in a different section. But I learn a lot from a resume in terms of who are the references that are listed. I think it's important that, this person's listing a superintendent of schools. Wow, this person must have done a really good job. Or they're listing an administrator such as a principal or assistant principal. Good stuff. If they're listing 4 colleagues, that they share their office with, not impressive for me, because all of our teacher friends love us and we love them, and we're colleagues and we support each other. But having an administrative view is carries a little bit more weight to an administrator. Also, it's easier just from logistics, it's easier for an administrator to call an administrator or email them. They're going to be more available than a teacher who's teaching 6 periods a day or whatever it is and running to do an extra sectional or a private lesson for this student, or let me start this clarinetist on bassoon. So I think it's a lot easier to reach admin. And a lot of times I would call them around 5 or 5:30, and they were typically still in their offices.
So I'm thinking about this from the perspective also of somebody who's listening who maybe has not worked in a school yet. What kind of references should they include, especially if they haven't had this kind of teaching experience yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that most of us have had some kind of experiences, whether we've been an assistant teacher in a summer school program, we've helped out a marching band during college. Of course, we've got our coordinating teacher who's helped us through student teaching. Maybe that teacher has volunteered to be a reference. When I had some student teachers in Livingston, I would, list as a reference. Sometimes I even did an observation. and wouldn't write it up per se, but just so I could say, yeah, I can serve as a reference. But I think even if it's an administrator of a restaurant where you worked, shift supervisor, or you worked at a temp agency and this is the supervisor at the temp agency. So someone, who was in that administrative realm, could serve whether they're in music or not.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're out there and it's April, you still have a few weeks left of your student teaching placement. If that district supervisor, if your building principal hasn't, observed you and sat down with you, just make the time now, because that person is very valuable to you as you're going through the interview process. I made sure at the end of my student teaching placement to have both the principal and the art supervisor observe me. One wrote me a lovely letter of recommendation that I was able to include in my application. And then wouldn't you know it, the woman I was student teaching with ended up moving on at the end of the year. So they already knew me. They already knew, who I was. So I think that's an important thing to note. If you're in the student teaching placement right now, do that and get that on in writing on your way out the door.
I remember when I was, and this would be really difficult if it's your first outing in the job market and you're sending out 45 resumes and all this. But, if you get called for an interview, or even if you didn't and you just know you really want to teach in a particular district, my suggestion, in addition to sending a good resume, is to research the district and its program and possibly get out to actually, if for a music teacher, go to a concert or something like that. I remember when I applied at Madison, I found out that John was doing a concert, his spring concert. And before we even had the interview, I made sure to get to that concert and introduce myself right there and then as, somebody who had been, interested in the job. I remember there was another job that I had applied to later on in a nearby district. And I found out that the new principal there was doing a meet and greet. So I went and crashed the meet and greet and introduced myself there to,
Wow.
introduce myself there to the principal. It's making that contact is really important. And I did get both of those interviews. So
I did the same. I did the same thing applying for Livingston. My friend's daughter was, at her spring concert. And I was like, how about I tag along? Oh, hey, how you doing? I'm Jen Wise. Oh yeah, I did just put in for that middle school band job. It's like, it's important. And, just putting yourself out there is a big, it's a big thing. If you don't already have the connections where you think you want to be, And
I, a lot of times, jumping again to the interview, there are more than one people in the interview room. And I used to interview with a principal when I was a supervisor. And his first question always was, what do you know about our school? Or what do you know about our school district?
Yeah.
And if they could say, like Erik, well, I attended your spring concert, a week ago, their jaws would drop.
Sure.
Or at least I've looked at your website. I know a parent in your district as you did, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Those go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the being prepared. And again, you want to convince the principal or supervisor you're ready for this job. And one of the ways that you convince them is, I've driven around the town. I've driven around and seen the schools. I've talked to so you've already done preparation. So, this person looks like they're really ready to walk in and be a success.
Yeah. I remember my second lap interviewing with Livingston. I was talking to the school secretary that was, inviting me in for the interview. And she's like, we're the school right on Livingston Ave. And I'm like, oh, it's a block from my grandma's house. Oh, where's your grandma? Oh, she's right off in Northfield. She's on Chestnut, and we got to talking and all of a sudden you've got a face, you kind of pop out a little bit because you feel like you're part of that school already,
And if that secretary says, hey, I really like that Jen Wise lady, you should call her back again. That I imagine that would hold quite a bit of sway to an administrator.
100%. In fact, I used to ask, if we had 6 teachers in a row, I would ask the secretary, so what did you think? How were they? because obviously they're going to be more natural and more real in the office sitting there than they are, in a, scarier, situation in an interview. So that carried a lot of weight. Plus I thought the world of the secretaries that I worked with.
Oh, sure.
So I very much valued their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Have either of you had any experience with job fairs? Did you ever go to any, or did you, John? Were you ever having to sit at one and meet people?
No, it's interesting. We talked about it over the years in Livingston, and I was either not able to go, or we didn't have openings, or we had openings, but we had thousands of applications.
Sure. Yeah.
Again, in the classroom teacher world, you have so many more interested people.
Candidates. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Have you, Jen, had experiences with job fairs?
I went to a job fair one time, and I ended up getting 2 calls from 2 different districts. And I was like, oh, I have a free afternoon. They're holding it in the dorm right next door to mine. Let's see what's going on, So I went over there, and I had 3 or 4 copies of my resume, and most of the tables I walked up to weren't looking for a music teacher. But I ended up having a conversation with a school that had like a little, I don't know, not a sandwich board, but a little sign on their table that said like, we're looking for music and science and, language arts. So I was like, okay, let's see what's up. And it turned out the person they sent for that job fair was a principal and a former band director. And we had a lot of similar connections, and we got to talking. And then I found myself just like on a soapbox about the value of middle school classroom music, but of course, before I found out that he was a former music teacher, and I said, pardon me, I'm going to step off my soapbox, and he's like, no, I'm sure we'll hear more. We'll call you next week about the music thing, and it ended up being valuable. I didn't get the job, but I felt like going to a job fair and just kind of, saying a little, like starting to talk a little bit about myself in a setting where just that's all you do is you walk around and talk to administrators for an hour. I think that helped me when I stepped into my first interviews. So like if a job fair is something that's open to you, and you're not going to find a music position at every table. You're just not. But when you do, it does feel pretty good to sit down and talk with a school principal and present yourself and dress up for that job fair and have your resume in your hand. And, that was kind of empowering for me. I felt like going into, my first interviews, I was like, okay, I kind of sort of know what they might be asking me, because they, some administrators ask questions and some are just like, okay, go, but I'd recommend like just trying it if it's something available to you, because I found it valuable.
And that would make you less stressed too. If, like the more in advance of the district, I've met a couple of the people. Right. Then you walk into the job interview and it's like, oh, good, I already know that person. Yeah. I already have a rapport with them.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. If possible, I would go to as many job fairs as I could get to.
We've kind of already started going into the interview process, the interview meetings and all that. First question: what is the appropriate way to dress? What's too dressy versus what's not dressy enough? I remember being on an interview panel as a teacher, interviewing people, and we walked in, and I remember my principal said to me, "You guys aren't wearing jackets." Because I was just wearing my collared shirt. And I was like, well, no, this is what I normally wear to school. And he went to his office and he got like 2 sport jackets for the 2 male teachers that were in the interview. So we would have jackets on for the interviews.
My
so
goodness.
How do you know what is the appropriate? I mean, obviously we want to be professional, but how dressy is too dressy? What are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, I used to interview with a colleague in the Livingston schools, and she would say to me, we're not hiring person X because they weren't dressed up. And if they don't feel like this job is that important, I don't want them. So I want people who really dress up and look professional and look like they're ready to represent themselves. So in this case, this is one important person that I worked with who really felt like people needed to be dressed professionally. So for men, a suit, for women, better, a step up from what we wear day to day when we have to be on the floor with kids and getting valve oil on our pants and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's
which
so
happened
hard.
to me today, by the way. Yeah, my principal walked in today and he said, "Hey, how'd your day go?" And I said, "Well, it was good, except I forgot, sometimes you're working on a trumpet and you get valve oil on your crotch." And so he looked down and he goes, "That's an image that's going to be tough to get rid of." So
that's good. Oh my goodness.
Anyway, getting back to the dress code for interviews, I think it's, we dress professionally and we dress sort of like we're going to a concert or,
When I was like right after college, before that, magical September of my first year of teaching, I was on so many interviews. All of my favorite interview dresses and suits and outfits were the cleaners all at once. I don't know what I was thinking. And then I got the call, right, for another job. And I look in my closet and all I had was this tight fitting green dress that was just like not appropriate at all for an interview. And my car was in the shop. I had to borrow my mom's car. Like, I was totally thrown off. But I ended up walking in that interview like, ugh, what else could happen today? What else could be like off about my game today? And that was the job I got and taught for 9 years. And it was
there you go.
Isn't that
so
funny?
It worked in your favor.
It worked in my favor, but I would not recommend it because that was very stressful. And I think you hold yourself a little differently when you dress up and when you when you do your hair and makeup and right, gentlemen? But I think
my hair.
Yeah, I think
next question.
Yeah, right. I know. I think,
but I do feel there's a real piece to like feeling good about how you look that day. So I know for the Livingston principal interview, which was a huge committee, I had a gray suit and a white shirt, but I did go out and buy a green, sort of office green tie because it was the school colors for the Livingston Lancers. And it worked out.
Oh, I've done that too. I've interviewed in Mawa, and I have frames that have that like Thunderbird blue eyepiece. And I definitely wore those in my interview. And I was like, go T-Birds.
So all of our college seniors now need to go out and buy a tie every time they have an interview for the right color or glasses with the right logo.
Oh my gosh.
No. So along the same line, I was kind of curious because I never quite know how to be in an interview. Because I know it always depends on who you're interviewing with, but how relaxed or formal should you be in an interview? And should you be like that chameleon and take your cue from from whoever is interviewing you? Or how do you strike that balance between like relaxed but not too relaxed and formal but not like stiff? What do you look for? What are your suggestions? Because I've never been great at that part.
Oh, I remember you were great in your interview, Eric. No, I think
kind, John.
Yeah. And I do remember that you came to that concert, by the way. I think it's just, real life. You just read the room. And, I've been on some interviews that were very, very serious and some that were a little bit lighter. I always, as an interviewer, tried to relax whoever was coming in. So the first thing I would say was like, okay, take a deep breath, interview. I mean, I would introduce the folks around the room and we would just say, this is the first thing I would always say. We've read your resume. It's very impressive. That's obviously why you're here. But can you fill in a little bit in between the words and just tell us a little bit about yourself? So right from the beginning, we just get a sense of like, okay, what's important to them. And we could know if they go on for 14 paragraphs, we know this is a problem. And that only happened like 5% of the time where people talked a little too long. But I tried to have people relax, have a nice relaxing chair, have water for them, tissues, the whole, just like make everybody as comfortable as possible. And even when they were sitting in the office, we would offer them tissues. We would tell them where the women's room or men's room was, just so they could sort of get comfortable. And if they got there early, we'd say, oh, you know, feel free to walk around the building, get a sense of the building. And again, that just relaxed people.
You know, that question, tell me a little bit about yourself. I know it's coming, and still in the moment, it mystifies me.
Yeah.
Because it's so hard, because, you know, I know if I'm walking in and talking to a music supervisor and a band director, like I kind of know what I want to say. And if I'm talking to like just the building principal, I know what I want to say, but still, if it's a big panel, I am mystified about what I should say. You know,
what are you listening for, John, when you ask that question?
Well, again, are they prepared? Do they feel like they have the experience? And I walked into interviews where I went like, I don't really think I have the toolkit for this gig. So I know what that feels like. But I think we have to convince ourselves that no matter what our background is, we feel like we're ready for this. And here's why. So I would obviously give the overview of what my training was, what my experience was, and why I thought, why I was excited about the job. Certainly you want to stay positive in those first few moments, because it's just like when we judge region band or all state band, we know in the first 30 seconds if this person's a player or, I mean, obviously we haven't gone to the sight reading yet, but you can tell quite a bit in the first few seconds. And it's the same thing with an interview. It's the eye contact, the nice firm handshake, professional appearance. They sit up nice and tall, and they look at you. I can remember in an interview one time, I was looking to the side of the principal, and she kept going like this to get my head back, so I was making eye contact with her. Really interesting. Wow. And it really helped me out. It was a great lesson for me.
Wow.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. Thank you, Dr. Senek, for that.
That's wild.
But yeah, I think that it's a golden opportunity. And you know what every administrator is looking for is this somebody who loves kids, is going to connect with kids, and is going to be a kid magnet? Because we teach electives, at least in the ensemble world of choral, instrumental, and students have to elect to be with you. So I think in that first thing, if you can talk about your passion about music, your passion about working with students, then you're off to the races. What do you guys think?
I've been on interviews in a very limited manner throughout my career. I haven't been in on many on the interviewer side, but yeah, I always feel like that's it's all about, I want to know their personality. We can talk about pedagogy later, and we can talk about their accolades later, but I want to kind of get a feel for what they're like.
Yeah.
But I remember Jen came in and smiled and was engaging, and that's why we wanted to hear more from Jen when she came in. I mean, that's what I listen for. I don't really listen for the answers as much as I'm listening for how they are interacting.
When we interviewed for my maternity leave replacement, sadly, it was on Zoom. It was, fall of or spring of 2020, and we were all at home. But even on Zoom, it was amazing the how, not every interviewer looked at all the kids and say, hey, tell me your name. I know you've got something on the corner of the screen, but tell me your name. What year were you in high school? Do you love your instrument? It was half of them asked the kids something about themselves and, really looked into the camera and said, let's go. And the other half just were like, okay, open your books to page 4 and we're going to go over this, and it was amazing, the difference. And again, wonderful, wonderful people. But, the way it translated in an interview was really interesting to watch. So,
and that's a whole other bucket of worms, is trying to do that over Zoom.
Oh yeah, that was cool.
If you're a new teacher right out of college and you're not super comfortable with the interview process anyway, and now you have to do it over Zoom. Oh man.
Yeah. I felt for everybody there. Luckily we picked, someone wonderful and somebody I already knew in person. But yeah, that was tough. When I go to an interview, I usually do bring some kind of portfolio, whether it's just, a thumb drive with a video of me conducting, or an actual portfolio with lesson plans. Or, John, how important is that to you? And what's your perspective on people bringing portfolios to interviews?
Well, like Erik said, I was most interested in talking to the person and really having a two-way conversation and getting to know them as, what really excites you about what you do as an educator. I was not interested in leafing through a huge notebook. And I know there are some administrators that do want to look at the notebook. So it's something we have to bring, we have to provide, we have to organize. But just know, don't be offended if some administrators don't look at it. They might just be interested more in the person. And past that, then I would be very interested in the demo lesson and how the person plays as a musician, talking to their references. That, for me, that was gold. The portfolio was bronze or below, just for me.
Sure.
Oh,
Sure.
I get that.
I know I always brought one to my interviews, and it was just a binder, a 3-ring binder. And it was kind of in like sections. And occasionally I try to like reference it in the interview, be like, oh, one of the questions you always get asked are, what does a concert look like? What is your, what was your last concert, or how do you program a concert? I'd be like, well, I happen to have my concert program here in my portfolio. Here, would you like to take a look at it? And sometimes they, took a 2-second glance at it and send it back.
Yeah, I just feel like it disturbs the rhythm a little bit of the flow of the interview, looking down, looking up, and then, if you're really reading, you can't listen and pay attention to what the response to the next question is. So for me, I like to stay, with the eye contact and the person to person conversation. And I'd like to hear them explain about their philosophy about concert programming.
Sure.
Yeah. I remember sitting at the end of an interview that I really had my heart set on this position. I was very, very, really wanting this one. And the interview ended. I'm sitting there looking at my portfolio that I spent like all night updating, and everything. And I said to like the high school band director that was on my right, I was like, I don't think you want to see my 6th grade band like word wall, do you? And he was like, we're good. We'll give you a call. I was like, okay, thanks. And I like, cause I was like, okay, I'll file that one away, and I feel like with the portfolio thing, you kind of got to read the room. If it's the right time to bring it out and you have it ready to go, great. But I don't know if it's like John said, I think people are a lot more interested in hearing from you. I did my first job that I got. I did end up leaving them with it was 2008. I left them with a CD, and on the CD was just my like final conducting experience, like in student teaching. I was conducting a 6th grade band, and like, this is me on the podium. This is what I look like in a concert. You get the whole picture. And I think I had a short video of a lesson. And I do think that was helpful for them because I was interviewing in like the 3rd week of August, and they weren't going to have time for a demo lesson, and they weren't going to have time for a 2nd and 3rd interview. And it was like, okay, we need to decide this week who's going to teach our beginning band. And from both the principal and the band director that was in the interview at the time, they said, wow, that video, like, I got to see you in front of a group. That was cool. And that was valuable to me in August, because we weren't going to bring kids in August for a demo lesson. And some districts might, but that one wouldn't. And the band director that was there, he said, you were standing in front of a 6th grade band. How did you get that 6th grade band to sound like that? And that was kind of a cool comment that he made on my, portfolio. So, But again, that was 2008, and I handed them a CD. So, I don't know how you do that now, but I guess send a link in an email or something. But I think they found that short, portfolio something valuable. So.
Yeah, and again, there may be administrators that do like to see that, so we do have to walk in with that preparation. It does show that you're hardworking, prepared, organized. The fact that Erik said, "Okay, I've got these in different sections," and that does show that you are, you've spent time and you're organized and thorough. And
so
I would have liked to seen the word wall, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty cool. We and the kids made it. That was why I was really proud of it. It's because I didn't make it. The kids made it. It's like, what words are important while we're rehearsing these pieces, and they like, Post-its and pins, and so the Take a Cue official stance on portfolios. There's a time and a place. But it's not
bring
always.
But
bring it. But there's a time and a place.
Don't be offended.
Yep.
So I'd like to dive into a topic a little bit here that's a little bit personal to me, and I know that there are other people out there, and that is the potentially negative topic in your interview. Like, for instance, little experience, being let go from a former employer, having a gap in your teaching experience. And so I thought we could talk a little bit about that. I'll just throw it out there. On the first episode or second episode of Take a Cue, I had mentioned that I didn't get rehired and then left teaching for 4 years. So when I got back into the workforce, that was definitely a topic of discussion at several interviews. And I don't know if I handled it great. I mean, I ended up getting the job, so I guess I handled it okay. But I want to know your thoughts about that. So, John, when you see that there's a gap in experience or something's a little negative, like what are your suggestions for people? How should they handle that?
Well, I think all of us have, like I said right at the onset of this podcast, all of us have a winding trail as musicians and artists and educators. This is not a clear path where we go to med school and do a residency and end up in hospital A, B, or C. So I think all of us are on a journey, and I don't think gaps are negative. I think it's how we explain them. Well, this was an opportunity for me. Yes, I left this position, but this was an opportunity for me to explore some other things. Did I want to work in industry? Did I want to work in fundraising? Did I want to work in the music store, music teaching world? Did I want to perform or write music or work in retail? And I think we all have, we don't really know what we want to do when we're 18 or 22 or 32 or 62. We're all kind of going down that path. So I think it's how we explain it and how we explain it to ourselves too. I mean, there's really some positive things about taking a gap year or having tried something else. One of the great mentors I was able to study with is Harry Owens, who was a phenomenal band director in the Verona public schools. And he left the school district at some point to work in Boston, I think at the college level, and then came back to the high school level and was back at Roxbury. I also think, and I'm not positive about this, he may have been in the fundraising world for a while because he could sell anything. I mean, he sold band to all of us, but, or in my case, he was a drum lesson teacher, but he could sell anything because he is such an incredible human being with just an amazing personality. So there's somebody who took some turns, a right turn, left turn, but I'm sure he could explain it and say, well, I learned that this is what I didn't want to do, or I learned that, oh, that's what this is really like. Well, when I compared the two, I think I would prefer to be back in the classroom. When I was interviewing for principalships, I think I had 5 or 6 interviews, and I really got the perspective after a while that I'm going to go in and give 100%, try my best, I practiced my interview skills. I, obviously did research on interview questions. But I knew that in some districts, well, they weren't looking for a principal that had an arts background. They really wanted a math person, or they really wanted an ELA person to balance out their administrative team. Or maybe they wanted young, or they wanted older, or they wanted a certain gender, or they didn't want a certain gender. Everybody's looking for a balanced team. And it took me a while to realize that. So if you don't get a position, realize that, well, maybe they're, in the back of their mind, they were looking for X, Y, or Z. Or maybe they're really going through the motions with the interview, and they already have somebody in place. They had an outstanding student teacher, and they're just, that's who they're going to offer it to. Mm-hmm. So don't fret if you don't get the gig. It's just part of the game, unfortunately. Yeah. And by the way, I was asked a question in Livingston. You talk about tough questions, or how do you explain away a certain thing? I was in a big group interview, my first interview at Livingston. There were, I think, 11 people there. And one person said, John, if you got this position in Livingston, and by just some happenstance could bring your entire staff over from your current school, would they all come? And I thought, well, if I was really good, yes, they would. But I was honest. I said, no. To be honest with you, no, they would not all come. Most would, but there are some that, I was, lighting a fire under, or trying to have them teach in a different way or whatever. And they wouldn't have come along, because their world got a little less comfortable when I was there. And that's a moment I'll never forget. That was a tough question.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So John, we're answering all these questions. We're getting rapid fire questions at us in these interviews. What stands out in the answers? Like what sticks with you at the end of the interview?
So the experience I will never forget is we were interviewing 6 people in a row, half-hour interviews, boom, 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 boom. It was late in the afternoon. We had all taught our full days, or we were, working with bus issues or student issues or whatever we were dealing with. And so we were tired. So at the end of the 6 interviews, maybe it's 5:30, 6 o'clock, we rank our candidates. Okay, yeah, the 4th one, that was my number 1. The 3rd one was my number 2. Okay, then we share the numbers, add them up, and say, okay, well, the first candidate that we listened to happens to be our number 1, and the 6th is our number 2. And then we would say, oh, well, let's talk a little bit about number 4. Wait, who was that? That was Catherine. Who was Catherine? I don't even remember. We would just, after 6 interviews, we were a little confused. And what clarified for us was when the interviewees used stories, told stories. So we would ask a question, and they would illustrate through a story, how they had experienced that issue in prior years. So stories, as we all know from brain science, that's what the brain remembers. That's what we cling on to. So I can remember my wife was going into an interview, and an administrator friend told her to go in with about 5 stories in her pocket, ready to go. So I think that's good advice for people going into interviews. There were always certain questions that we asked everyone. One is, have you ever worked with children with unique behaviors or unique learning strategies? And if so, how did you make it work on behalf of the student? We always asked, how do you organize? How do you organize your classroom? How do you organize all your materials, your instruments, your music library, your bucket drums, et cetera, et cetera? Because it's a big part of the music world, as we all know. We always ask them about a time they failed and what they learned from that. How did they move forward? We always talk to them about, ask them, had they had any experience with ESL students? We ask them what their classroom looks like. So if we were to walk in your classroom tomorrow, what would that look like? And finally, we would say, okay, if you are the top person for our students, and that's who we're going to hire. We're going to hire who we think is best for our students. If you are that person, how are we going to convince our parent community that you were that person? So give us a little sales pitch that we can actually use, because we will have parents who say, why did you hire Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so? Or, and so that was kind of how we ended, was for the candidate to kind of sell themselves to us. And then, of course, we would ask them if they had any questions. And I was always impressed when people had questions. Well, I see on your website that, what about this? Now, obviously, you'd never ask about salary, because that's in a subsequent interview with the superintendent or head of HR, depending on the district. But questions about the pedagogy or the structure or the schedule, those are always fair game. And I appreciated them.
Find a question, like come with a question ready for that question, because you're going to get asked that question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
What do you think? Don't you think that's wise to come with a question or two?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
My question was always, if they weren't clear about the before and after school, responsibilities, I'd ask about those things. I'd ask about like cross-curricular opportunities, like what kind of things is the person in this position already doing with the art teacher, already doing with the rest of the building. Like that was one of the questions that I would always have on deck. And like performances, I don't know if those things were already said, like how many performances do we do a year? Are there any opportunities for performances beyond the winter and spring concert? Like those, I had a hierarchy of end of the interview, questions that it's like, you got to ask something. You got to ask something at the end, just to let everybody know that you're engaged and you're interested enough to ask it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I always brought a note card in my jacket pocket with questions that I wanted to ask at the end of the interview. And I would always take them out. I remember one time I remember going to an interview. This was, I don't know, probably 15 plus years ago. I remember going to an interview and I took out the card, and I think the supervisor said to the principal next to him, "Look at this guy. He's got his questions on a card already." But one question I always ask, and I want to know the answer to this question, is like, as an administrator, what do you look forward to coming and doing in this school district every day? Why do you like working here? And sometimes that catches the administrator off guard, because like you said, John, they've just dealt with 10 angry parents and a bus that never came and all this stuff. And that can be telling, as well.
Yeah. I also like this question. What are you looking for? What are the most important qualities of the person that you're looking for this position? What's going to make this person a success here? What do you think is most valuable? Because I thought that was very revealing. And if I didn't get the job, it would help me for the next one.
I also asked, what are the things that you like best about the person who is in this position now? Even if it was somebody who was not being rehired. I want to know what they liked, so that if I get hired, I'm going to keep doing those things.
Yeah. Very good. Very good.
That's a good one.
And
I like that.
The bottom line, wouldn't it have been wonderful? I mean, this podcast is fantastic, but wouldn't it have been wonderful if we had gotten to listen to a podcast like this before our first interviews?
Right.
There's some real gems here.
Well, that's the idea. That's the idea. John, is there anything else that you want to add? I know we've kind of got our little format here of how we're planning, to chat about this. The demo lesson is next, and that's a big section where we can talk about lots of things. Is there anything else that you would like to add about the interview meeting process or the resume or anything up until this point?
No, I just do think if it's a committee, even if it's 2 or 3 people, to thank each one before you leave. Again, a nice firm handshake, eye contact, and I really enjoyed meeting you. Thank you for your time. so that you leave on a very positive note as you walk out the door, and people can go like, "Oh, that person was very nice." Yeah, so I think a strong ending, just like in a musical piece, a strong ending. We know from brain science, the brain remembers the first part of the lesson and the last part of the lesson. Same thing, primacy recency effect in an interview.
To our listeners, we're going to actually stop the conversation here. And we're going to come back to it at the demo lesson and teacher performance part of our podcast here, so that you don't have to hang on for a whole hour and 45 minutes about our conversation.
Yeah. And for now, if there's anything you want to chime in on in social media and hear about in later episodes, please reach out to us. Again, we're Take a Cue podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We love hearing from you. And please, after any of our episodes that you particularly enjoy, please give us a rating and a review. That helps other people find us and helps us get more exposure, so more band directors can hear what we're up to.
And if you enjoyed this episode and you're not subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe so that you get a notification when the second half of our interview with John drops. Because if you enjoyed the first half, you're going to really get a lot out of the second half too. So for now, we're going to take a pause here and catch us at our next episode to hear the final part of our interview with John. Until then, go out and make great music with your kids.